WADR, promoting dialogue.
It's midday in Dakar. Good afternoon and many thanks for tuning into West Africa Democracy Radio, broadcasting on 94.9 FM and around the world on WADR.org. Welcome to Newslink, and here are the top stories. Governance experts project Burkina Faso and Guinea's cooperation pact as protection against ECOWAS sanctions.
The fact that they signed this agreement can even be considered as a way of preventing sanctions against the sanctions that are coming if Burkina is not meeting its obligation under the agreement that they signed with ECOWAS.
Ghana secures $350 million loan from the World Bank to boost digital infrastructure and enhance food security. Gambia Express Union calls for the repeal of repressive laws and implementation of access to information law. And Senegal falls in press freedom rankings as Reporters Without Borders publishes global survey.
In West Africa, generally, what we can say is that the 2023 Press Freedom Index evaluates the conditions of exercise of journalism in 180 countries and territories. And this year, it reveals that in the world, 31 countries has a very bad situation.
Please stay with us for details of these stories and more.
Here is James Adjapong with Newslink.
Many thanks for joining us. Let's begin the bulletin in Burkina Faso, where experts suggest that the recent signing of 22 cooperation agreements between the Burkinabe government and Guinea could be a step taken to protect Burkina Faso's administration from potential sanctions by ECOWAS. The regional body is known to impose sanctions on member states that do not fulfill their obligations. The agreements include various areas such as craft, air services, transport and transit, military and technical cooperation, and security, with the goal of enhancing bilateral ties and cooperation between the two countries. Ibrahim Khan has been speaking to WADR on the development.
The fact that two countries in West Africa, Francophone countries, sign an agreement, it's normal. They all have relationships. They all have their citizens in the other country. So signing an agreement is really very normal. But in this particular case, it's the number of agreements signed and the area that are concerned by the agreement. 22, meaning that now Burkina Faso is really considering developing strong economic ties with Guinea-Conakry. But the most interesting aspect of it is that Burkina Faso has signed one agreement to use the port of Conakry as an entry point for its goods in West Africa. You know, Burkina Faso is one of the landlocked countries in West Africa.
So what do you think warrant for this agreement?
The fact that they signed this agreement can even be considered as a way of preventing sanctions against the sanctions that are coming if Burkina is not meeting its obligation under the agreement that they signed with ECOWAS. Why I'm saying this? It's because Burkina Faso, Guinea-Conakry, and Mali are all under sanctions.
Can this agreement really stand the test of time, especially among two countries that are grappling with economic crisis?
Well, as you know, Burkina Faso is not only struggling. Burkina Faso is desperate about the security issue and any relationship, any agreement that they can sign to help them to get maybe arms, to get military support from their neighboring countries will be very important. Recently, Burkina signed the same type of agreement with Côte d'Ivoire, and Côte d'Ivoire are now even considering sending them ammunition and other things to really support the military action of the government in Burkina Faso.
Ibrahim Khan is a governance expert. The Ghanaian Parliament has approved two loan agreements between the government and the World Bank for a total of $350 million. $200 million will be used to finance the country's digital acceleration project, which aims to promote the adoption of digital technologies and expand access to digital infrastructure. The remaining $150 million will be used to fund the second phase of the West Africa Food System Resilience Program, which aims to improve food security and promote sustainable agricultural practices in the region. Atiawene Bela Lawson in Accra with more details.
The legislature further approved the loan agreement for an amount of $6.6 million as a third additional financing for the Ghana COVID-19 Emergency Preparedness and Response Project. Parliament also approved an on-lending agreement between the government and Development Bank Ghana for an amount of €170 million to support the establishment of a financially sustainable development bank. Part of the loan agreement approved is a $150 million facility from the World Bank to finance the primary healthcare investment project, an amount of $150 million to finance the public financial management for service delivery program. Ghana is awaiting the decision of an official creditor committee on its request for debt relief. A favorable outcome in the form of financing assurances will open the door for the IMF's board to approve a $3 billion loan for the West African nation, which is in the process of restructuring almost all of its debt, which stood at 576 billion cedis at the end of November. Before then, however, Ghana is taking steps to boost its tax base and lift it from among the lowest in sub-Saharan Africa. The country's tax-to-GDP ratio in 2022 was less than 13% compared with the 18% average in the sub-region, according to the Finance Ministry.
Atiawene Bela Lawson with that report.
Fresh and breaking news all the time. Hear it first as the news breaks, only on West Africa Democracy Radio. Newslink continues.
We cross over to the Gambia, where the press union, GPU, has made a call to the government to repeal the repressive laws contained in the 1997 Constitution. The GPU is also urging the authorities to fast-track the implementation of the Access to Information Law, which was enacted in 2019 but is yet to be fully operationalized. Our Banjul correspondent Sankule Janko has more.
The Gambia is a country where security agents can confiscate journalists' equipment without due process, hindering their work. To commemorate World Press Freedom Day, the Gambia Press Union has called for the repeal of draconian laws such as false information and sedition. Mohammed Esba is the president of the Gambia Press Union, GPU.
First is to repeal the draconian law. For instance, the false information, the sedition, even the Information Communication Act, where state security can just confiscate your equipment without a judicial oversight. And also laws that have been here for so long, like the Telegraph Act, the Public Secret Act.
In August 2021, the Gambia enacted the Access to Information Bill, assented to by President Barrow. However, the law's implementation has stalled as the authorities have failed to select a commission as required by the Act. The GPU has called on the authorities to expedite the implementation of the Access to Information Law.
So I don't think government should even waste time towards establishing this commission. They should establish it. For people to see government serious, they should definitely expedite the implementation of the access to information.
The president of the Women Journalists Association of the Gambia, Annette Camara, highlights that women journalists in the Gambia do not have press freedom.
Like, there's no freedom for women journalists because they're not free in their various media houses. They're not free to dress the way they want to dress in their various media houses. They are molested for dressing anyhow. They are not free for the fact that they cannot cover stories they want to cover.
Yankuba Jallo, a journalist with the Foreign newspaper, argues that Gambian journalists cannot claim to have press freedom while laws hinder their work.
Everyone is claiming that we are free, which to an extent I disagree, because freedom is not by privilege. It has to be by legal instruments. So the legal instruments that actually deprive us of those rights still exist, and they have not been repealed. So the space is still there, it's volatile. The laws can be used against us any moment, any time by the regime. So we are not free.
The Gambia is ranked 50 out of 180 countries in the Global Press Freedom Index as of June 2022. For Newslink on West Africa Democracy Radio, I am Sankula Jenko reporting from Banjul.
Meanwhile, journalists in Liberia are joining their peers worldwide to celebrate Press Freedom Day. As part of the day's observance, Liberian journalists will convene at the Press Union of Liberia headquarters before marching from central Monrovia to the Monrovia City Hall along the main Tubman Boulevard. The official indoor program will then take place at the City Hall. WADR's Darlington Pokpa in Monrovia has this report.
Here in Liberia, the issues of threats against journalists as well as poor media economy among others are constraints facing journalists. However, the publisher of Liberia's front page Africa Rock News here calls on media owners to improve their employees' wages.
The issue of change, I think we need to look inside ourselves as a body and make sure that we don't succumb to threats, intimidation from the powers that be. It's important for the media to hold together in these times. The media is the last bastion of hope for Liberian people in terms of speaking the truth to power and exposing corruption in the society, and also looking at other issues, not just politics, but environmental issues. As you know, times are hard, the economy is tough, and Corona, then Ebola, then Corona came, and but the media has to be strong and make sure that media owners pay their staff as well, and make sure that they can be able to live a decent life. Make sure your staffers are taken care of.
For journalist Abraham Paco and others, media owners are not willing to provide a living wage for journalists in their employ, thereby making journalists vulnerable to politicians.
As a journalist, if I depend on my salary alone, there's nothing. The salary is not attractive. Not at all. I want to be bold to say this. A fixed salary, and you say you are a media person, and just so or wholly depend on why you were taken from your media house, I think you'll be making a lot of mistakes.
You don't have any benefits, if you were injured or you were sick or any of that, there are no benefits coming your way. You're not even insured for the fact of the matter. The pay is very small, very minimal. You can't even take care of your needs alone, at least to say your family.
As the Secretary General of the Press Union of Liberia, Musa Kanef, is championing the establishment of a media commission to oversee journalists' welfare and ensure journalists are ethical.
In the media commission law, we want to enact that if you do not have certain, for example, capital, you cannot open a radio station or a newspaper. During that, we will hold you accountable to what you do, and then we're going to be asking you to bring your payroll if you're going to employ 10 persons.
Journalists here will, as usual, attend the ceremony, anticipating that this time around something positive will be done to ensure their safety and welfare ahead of the 2023 elections. From Liberia, I am Darlington Pokpa reporting for WADR News.
Still on the International Day of Press Freedom, our attention now shifts to Niger, where the Nigerian Network of Journalists for Human Rights held a day-long event on the promotion and protection of human rights. The meeting was designed to empower journalists in the country to become more knowledgeable and effective advocates for human rights. Imwedit has more details in this report, filed by Niamey correspondent Mutala Zuberu.
The Nigerian Network of Journalists for Human Rights, RJDH, organized an event on the promotion and protection of human rights for media practitioners during the celebration of the International Press Freedom Day on May 3 each year. Aishatu Akaso, the Secretary General of the Network of Journalists for Human Rights, was involved in the organization of the event.
This meeting is thus a great opportunity for professional journalists to exchange ideas with an emphasis on freedom of expression as an essential driving force and catalyst for the attainment of all other human rights.
The theme for the 2023 edition of International Press Freedom Day is freedom of expression as a driving force for all other human rights. This theme was found to be relevant by Marty L. Musa, the president of the National Human Rights Commission.
Le thème de cette année vient à point nommé, eu égard au rôle de la liberté d'expression.
The theme this year serves to emphasize the necessity of freedom of expression in any responsible democracy. Indeed, a free and independent press becomes important, if not incomparable, tool for ensuring justice and promoting and protecting human rights. Indeed, since 1948, the relationship between freedom of expression and human rights has been enshrined in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights adoption on December 10 of that year by the United Nations General Assembly, and serves as a roadmap and compass for freedom, equality, and the dignity and protection of every human being around the world.
De dignité et de protection de chaque personne humaine partout dans le monde.
In June 2021, Niger modified the 2019 law on the repression of cybercrime to conform with international human rights standards. This involves the replacement of prison sentences for defamation and insult by electronic communication with fines.
A more edit with that report filed by Niamey correspondent Mutala Zuberu. You are listening to Newslink on West Africa Democracy Radio, broadcasting from Dakar, Senegal. Here is a reminder of our top stories. Governance experts project Burkina Faso and Guinea's cooperation part as protection against ECOWAS sanctions. Ghana secures $350 million loan from the World Bank to boost digital infrastructure and enhance food security. Gambia's press union calls for repeal of repressive laws and implementation of access to information law. And Senegal falls in press freedom rankings as Reporters Without Borders publishes global survey. Still ahead, we have our newspaper review, guest interview, and some sports update. Kindly stay with us.
West Africa Democracy Radio. It's you speaking.
It's 15 minutes past 12 here in our studios in West Africa Democracy Radio, broadcasting on 94.9 FM. Remember, we are streaming all around the world on WADR.org. The release of the 2023 World Press Freedom Index has shed light on the state of journalism in 180 countries and territories, coinciding with the celebration of World Press Freedom Day. The report indicates that 31 countries have a very serious situation for journalism, 42 have a difficult situation, and 55 have a problematic situation. In contrast, only 52 countries have a good or fairly good situation, meaning that a staggering 70% of countries have poor journalism conditions, while only 30% have satisfactory conditions. The rankings show considerable fluctuations, with some countries like the Gambia and Cape Verde performing well, while others like Senegal have experienced a significant drop in rankings. Sadibou Marong, the director of Reporters Without Borders RSF West Africa Bureau, speaks to us.
In West Africa, generally, it's what we can say in a more general way is that the 2023 Press Freedom Index evaluates the conditions of exercise of journalism in 180 countries and territories. And this year, it reveals that in the world, 31 countries has a very bad situation in the world, and then 42 a very difficult situation, and 55 problematic situation, and then the situation is only good in 52 countries. And that means the situations are bad in 7 countries out of 10 in the world, and only satisfactory in 3 out of 10 countries. In sub-Saharan Africa, for example, the index shows how the situation might be volatile in terms of increase and decrease, which are very important from country to country with some changes. For example, we can measure the increase of 30 points of Botswana and the decrease of 31 places of Senegal. And then all these situations are linked to the aggressivity of authorities on many other countries, and then the physical world, and the volatility of what we can consider as disinformation industry. And then in West Africa now, in Sub-Saharan Africa before West Africa, in Sub-Saharan Africa we have covered 48 countries, and in all those countries only 5 has a good situation.
Sadibou Maron is the director of Reporters Without Borders RSF at West Africa Bureau.
This is the newspaper review. Stay on top of the news. Get the most important stories with added insight and concise review.
This is the newspaper review.
Up next, we have our press stories from Banjul with WADR's Sankule Janko.
Hello there, and welcome to this edition of the Press Review, coming to you from Banjul, the Gambia. And we begin today's press review with the Standard newspaper, whose lead story reads, Dr. Cisse speaks on connections with Talib Bensouda, denies hunting for cabinet job from Barrow. Dr. Cisse is a popular university lecturer who is also the head of Citizens Alliance political party. And in this interview, he speaks about the connections he has with the current mayor of Kanafi municipality, Talib Ahmed Bensouda of the leading opposition UDP, who is, of course, seeking re-election for a second mandate. Man charged with accessory to mother discharged. Councillor Cisse charged, granted bail. And this other one has to do with the upcoming mayoral elections scheduled for 20 May 2023, and it reads 29 candidates nominated. Nigeria deploys 197 peacekeepers to the Gambia. We move on to the Point newspaper, whose lead story has to do with the alleged coup plot which is ongoing currently at the High Court of the Gambia. And it reads, Sanafadera planned one-year transition. State witness tells court Sanafadera is the alleged ringleader of the alleged coup plot. Gambia Press Union marks World Press Freedom Day today. That's another story. Independent candidate Mbo vows to digitalize Kanifing Municipal Council revenue. Gambia National Trade Union vows to deal with poor working conditions. Let's move on to The Voice newspaper. The lead story on The Voice newspaper says His Excellency Adama Barrow endorses 2 ratified UN Water Convention instruments. Gambia Revenue Authority, CG, presides over WCA experts meeting. National Human Rights Commission urges government to provide adequate resources to native-related agencies. And the last story on The Voice newspaper reads, Independent candidate Ahmad Jite vows to create program worth $30 million if elected. Let's take a look at the final newspaper for today, and it is the Fourier newspaper. And the lead story on the Fourier newspaper reads, over 300 undocumented Gambians in Turkey's prisons await deportation, Turkish-based Gambian alleges. Chief Justice assigns Justice Jaite to hear Studentsville lawsuit. And finally, the Gambia Transport Service Company General Manager says government funded the newly commissioned buses. These are the major stories making the headlines on Gambian dailies, and it's back to you in the studio.
Thank you, Sankole Janko, for that newspaper review.
Politics, analysis on major news, social matters, and all. This is A Guest.
The Press Union GPU in the Gambia has made a call to the government to repeal the repressive laws contained in the 1997 Constitution. To fast-track the implementation of the Access to Information Law, the GPU is also urging the authorities, which was enacted in 2019 but is yet to be fully operationalized. Our guest Aliu Jallo will share his opinion on the expectations from authorities by journalists regarding the implementational strategies they need to put in place to see the realization of the Access to Information Law. Another issue of concern is how the right of journalists can be safeguarded and the legal frameworks that are needed to be drawn for their security as the word marks World Press Freedom Day.
On records, on papers, it would show that the Gambia is doing well. But in the physical presence, or what actually reflects on the ground, is quite different. We've seen the climate has not changed as the crime against journalists persists without any serious action taken against perpetrators. We've seen politicians, we've seen the supporters of the president, and the police still perpetrating or still making actions of, attacking journalists. And up to date, no single case or perpetrator has been brought to book. For the past 5 years, or we've seen 15 cases recorded so far on attacks against journalists, either made by the police, by supporters of the president, and also by other politicians, opposition leaders. And we've not seen any concrete steps or legal steps taken against these perpetrators. So which shows that the post-Jammeh era or the dictatorial era that we used to live in still continues and still persists, even though we fought for this freedom 6-7 years ago. So far, there is no changes, obviously. We expected something greater than that.
So then what structures are you expecting authorities to put in place to see the full operationalization, especially of the Access to Information Law that journalists are calling for?
Well, what we want to see is we want to see the political will. Because most of the time, access to information law requires a longer term and also short term. But you need to put in mechanisms that would help to facilitate this. Since the Gambians signed this law back in 2021 to date, we've not seen government taking any stringent measures or actions to making sure that these laws are implemented to the latter. The last year, I engaged the Minister of Information as to how far has the government gone in trying to implement the access to information law. All he told me was the government is very much committed to making sure that these laws are implemented to the latter. But again, now, which means you need to put in mechanisms, you need to put in places. All what he told me was government has actually taken one step, that is trying to appoint information officers in all ministries. But that is commendable. But again, you look at the competency of those people and how much have they been built, the capacity in terms of, giving out. We still have those bureaucracy. Journalists still have issues in terms of accessing information from government offices. Some of these information officers that they appoint are not competent enough, are not open. They don't have the required resources and to feed the public, to feed journalists on what they want to know. Because when you ask them, all they'll tell you is, I'll get back to you, I'll do this. And again, record keeping is very important. Most of these ministries, you want to search for information, you cannot access some of those information because what happens is they have dormant websites, they have websites that are not updated. They have, social media handles that are not updated most of the time. So you cannot rely on those people. And these are mechanisms that will facilitate the easy flow of access to information. But if these things are not lacking, then it has to boil down to the political will. Is the government actually really ready? Are they just using this access to information bill as a propaganda tool to gaining support from the public? So a lot needs to be done in order for this access to information law or bill to be accessible.
So then finally, on this fateful day, what would your call on authorities, on how they can be a more vocal or implementational steps towards the protection of rights and freedoms of journalists?
Well, we want the government to take concrete measures by bringing into books perpetrators against journalists. Attack on journalists must cease, and then they should take measures to making sure that anybody that does it from their end should be reprimanded for it. This way, it will guarantee journalists that freedom of speech and then the access to information bill would be fully implemented.
Aliu Jallo is a Gambian journalist and social justice advocate. Now to some sports updates. Senegal booked a ticket to the quarterfinals of the Total Energies Under-17 African Cup of Nations AFCON for the first time in their history, following a 3-0 win against host Algeria on Tuesday. Meanwhile, Somalia scored their first ever goal and secured their first ever point at the Total Energies Under-17 Africa Cup of Nations after a 1-1 draw with Congo in their second Group A match at the Nelson Mandela Stadium in Algiers on Tuesday. And we have come to the end of this edition of Newslink from West Africa Democracy Radio, broadcasting from Dakar, Senegal. Thank you for listening, and many thanks to our listeners in the Gambia via Hot 104.3 FM, and in Liberia via Alternative Youth Radio 98.9 FM Lufa County, and in Ghana on Royals FM 104.7 Wenchi. Inyas Bilimu has been exceptional on the console. Many thanks to Mustafa Sek for our Facebook live coverage. Do interact with us via our social media platforms on Twitter, Instagram, at WADR News, and on Facebook, West Africa Democracy Radio English Service. Coming up at the bottom of the hour is a rebroadcast of our agenda program 50/50 with Atiawin and Bella Lawson. My name is James Adjapong. Good afternoon.
News, talk, music, get it all 24 hours on West Africa Democracy Radio 94.9 FM Dakar.